这个框网是字节的形状。
框网是长得怎么样？
还行。修着他喜欢 repeat。
这样不是更好吗？可以让大
Okay,
家
let's begin. So today we're going to talk about the separability principle. And it's often said that it's the cornerstone, conceptual cornerstone of arbitration. Because if the arbitration agreement is considered a part of the underlying contract, and if a dispute arises about the validity of the contract itself, and if they are one and the same, then it would have the effect of undermining arbitral jurisdiction. But if the arbitration agreement is considered separate from the underlying contract, even if the underlying contract is finally found to be invalid, you may still have a valid segment of it, which is the arbitration contract, which could give jurisdiction to the arbitral tribunal to decide the validity of or the invalidity of the underlying contract. Right? So that's the whole idea. So we have two separate contracts. The main contract can be the arbitration contract or the arbitration agreement. These two are treated separately. These two are considered to be completely independent contracts. And the arbitration agreement itself is presumptively separable or severable. Both terms refer to the same thing. And the arbitration agreement itself is autonomous, which means it can stand on its own, and it has separate quid pro quo. Separate quid pro quo. Right? There is a separate quid and there is a separate quo, which is the exchange of promises independently of this underlying contract. So when parties conclude an agreement for the sale of goods, that is one contract. Let's exchange goods. I'm going to pay you this amount of money. You're going to send me these quantity of goods. So that is separate quid pro quo, right? Exchanged. Wait a minute. If a dispute arises, what should we do? This is independent negotiation, right? Separate negotiation. Oh, instead of going to court, let's arbitrate. So that is the separateness of the arbitration. And that is an independent promise exchanged. It's about what to do about the other contract if a dispute arises. So that's how it is conceived. So it's autonomous, presumptively separable. We talked about presumptive validity of the arbitration agreement last time. Now we're talking about presumptive separability of the agreement. It's autonomous and it contains separate quid pro quo. What it means is that it could be subject to a different rule of decision, a different law. Law 1 applying here, law 2 applying here. This law may be different from this law, right? Or the same law could apply. We're talking about substitute law of contract for the invalidity of the arbitration agreement or the invalidity of the underlying contract. As we talked about last time, the grounds of invalidity of an arbitration agreement are limited by the New York Convention. But the grounds of invalidity of the underlying contract are not limited by the New York Convention. The New York Convention does not care about the dispute, the substance, the dispute, any dispute relating to the underlying contract. All it cares about is the arbitration agreement. And for the arbitration agreement, it provides some substantive rules about the validity. And we talked about last time, it's null and void and operative incapable of being performed, as understood by domestic court systems as fraud, duress, and waiver, mistake. So those are the only grounds under many legal systems that you can challenge the arbitration agreement. But the grounds of invalidity of this other could be many, depending on what law of contract applies to this one. Second, the decision maker of this could be different from this. So decision maker 1 and decision maker 2. It could be identical, but it could be different. In other words, the decision maker for this one could be the court in the state of the arbitral tribunal. The decision maker for this one, for the validity of this one, could be arbitral tribunal. Or it could be the court for both or the tribunal for both. That becomes a question of competence or jurisdiction of the court or the arbitral tribunal, and how it's allocated is going to be a subject for our discussion for next class. But today we'll just focus on the separability principle, just to show how, or to see how the two are separate, considered separate, with two different laws applying, possibly, and with two decision makers, possibly. And of course, if this is considered to be invalid, the court gets to decide the whole thing. If this is considered to be valid, the arbitral tribunal gets to decide the whole thing. You could have a split of jurisdiction, as I said. This is decided by the court, this is decided by the arbitral tribunal. Or both could be decided by the arbitral tribunal, or both could be decided by the court. So we'll explore all those possibilities. In some of these cases will help us understand the intricacies of the concept. Okay? All right. Let's now consider the first case, that is the Calcanus case, Second Circuit Court of Appeals, 1942. It's a case that has some complexities, and I imagine that you may have had some difficulty understanding in this case. Right? So before we discuss the separability principle, how the court dealt with it, I would like to tell you a little bit about the underlying contract, what it is about. Do you know what a charter party is? Huh? Yes, it is. So, they could write it hyphenated or otherwise the same word. Doesn't matter, but this is when you basically rent a ship or a vessel for the transportation of goods from one location to another. In the UK, they call it the charter party. And in some jurisdictions in the United States, it's also called that, particularly in the old days. So that charter party is simply a contract for the shipment of objects from location A to location B. It's a contract between the ship owner and the owner of the goods. From location A to location B, the ship takes these goods from Mr. X, delivers it to Mr. Y, and Mr. X pays this guy, or this, depending on the contract, this one pays it. So this particular dispute arises out of this charter party. So one of the parties said that it agreed to a charter party. The other one denied that any authorized person signed on his behalf. That means, oh, I did not agree to a charter party. In the meantime, some damages were sustained. In other words, one of the parties is claiming that the contract never existed in its entirety. When he says that, that contract obviously contained an arbitration agreement. So he denied that this thing existed at all. Within the charter party, there was an arbitration agreement. So he says, no one I authorized signed that contract. He's denying the existence of that contract in its entirety, including the arbitration agreement. So that is the fundamental, those are the fundamental facts of this case, right? Now, what was the most essential question that the court confronted in this case? What did they need to determine? It's basically a jurisdictional question. It's also a question of separability. And what was the most important question that they had to answer in this case?
It's the court or the arbitrator that should decide whether the whole contract existence.
Yeah, the problem that they were confronted with was, if one of the parties is arguing that the entirety of the agreement is invalid, could there be a portion of it that is not valid? Is it possible that there is a salvageable part of this whole contract to give the arbitral tribunal jurisdiction to decide whether or not it has jurisdiction? So it's a bit complicated, right? The only source of arbitral jurisdiction is an arbitration agreement. Right? That's the only source of arbitral jurisdiction, unless, of course, the court establishes that. This is, we're not talking about that. So if the only source of arbitral jurisdiction is the arbitration agreement, and if the existence of any agreement is denied, can you ask arbitrators to decide whether or not they have jurisdiction or not? Right? So the difficulty that this court had was because they were not applying the principle of separability. See how the principle of separability helps you to make that jurisdictional decision. If you consider the agreement to be just one, and one of the parties is saying, I never signed the contract, or at least someone that I authorized never signed it, is denying that he authorized someone to sign it on his behalf. So if I did not sign the whole contract, there's no way that I could be subject to arbitral jurisdiction. Right? That is the argument that he's making. Now, let me refer you to the first paragraph on page 192. So the appellant admits, as it must, that the district court had jurisdiction to determine whether the parties had made an agreement to arbitrate. Appellant contends, however, that once the court determined in this suit that there was such an arbitration agreement, the court lost all power over the suit beyond that of any staying further proceedings until there had been an arbitration as agreed or as agreed to. So appellee asserts that the defendant had repudiated the charter party. That's the last sentence. And that therefore, the arbitration clause must be wholly disregarded. By repudiation, I think they mean they completely denied its own existence, not merely breached it. So the two issues presented: does the arbitration provision here have the stripping effect described by the appellant? That is what we just said, or wholly without any effect because the appellant asserted that there was never an agreement in the first place. And then the court goes on saying under A that as the arbitration clause here is an integral part of the charter party, the court in determining that the parties agreed to that clause must necessarily first have found that the party charter exists. That's the key statement here. If the court determines that there is an arbitration agreement, it must necessarily first have found that the charter party exists. See the confusion? What is the source of this confusion? We're talking about what principle now? Separability, right?
Yes.
So the court has difficulty seeing these two contracts as separate, right? That's exactly what the problem is. It says, if the court determines that the parties agreed to that clause, which is the arbitration clause, it must necessarily first have found that the charter party exists. Right? That's what it says. Because, according to this court, this principle does not exist. If the court said, yeah, this existed, by so doing, it must have recognized the existence of the charter party. So the two are one and the same. Right? And then it says actually something a little bit more interesting under B. If you look at B, it says, if the issue of the existence of the charter party were left to the arbitrators, and they found that it was never made, they would have unavoidably, unless they were insane, be obligated to conclude that the arbitration agreement had never been made. See, the charter party, the main agreement, in the arbitration agreement for this court are one and the same. If you make the decision that the charter party never existed, that completely kills arbitral jurisdiction. Unless they are insane, the court says, they should also find that they don't have jurisdiction. Because it says, number one, it negates the court's prior contrary decision on a subject which they commit to the court. Second, would destroy the arbitrators' authority to decide anything and thus make their decision a nullity. If they find that there was no charter party, there couldn't be any part of that charter party that could give them jurisdiction, because their jurisdiction is exclusively based on party consent of the parties' agreement. So now, the court says under the FAA, or the FAA recognizes only 3 types of agreements. Now let's talk about each one of those. What is the first type of agreement under this court's analysis?
Agreement to an existing controversy. That's the first. Existing controversy.
Yes. So the first one is very simple. It's the arbitration of an existing controversy. What does that mean?
There is already a dispute.
Exactly. There is already a dispute. So once the dispute has arisen, the parties get together and say, let's arbitrate this matter. In which case there is no problem. The dispute has already arisen. So that is a submission agreement. That's what it's called. The dispute is there, and then you decide to submit to arbitration in the court. What is the second possibility?
A controversy arising out of a contract or transaction.
Exactly. So a controversy that arises out of a contract. Right? Controversy arising out of a contract. Now, why is this particular charter party, why is the dispute about this particular charter party not considered, according to this word, not considered a dispute arising out of this particular contract? What is the court's reasoning? That's the key in this case.
Because they think the contract is never exist, so it's not arising under a contract.
Yes, absolutely. What the court is saying is that a dispute can never arise out of a contract that doesn't exist. If the very existence of the contract is disputed, it's not possible that a dispute actually arises out of it. Does it make sense? Well, we'll talk about it again after considering cases. And then what's the third type of dispute covered under the APA according to this court?
Refuse to perform.
So a dispute about performance. A dispute about performance of contract. So a dispute about formation of contract. So there are different stages of contract, right? There is formation of contract, about the validity of the contract itself, about mutual consent, things like that. Or you could have a dispute about the performance of the contract. Once the parties do not disagree about whether or not there is a contract, but they disagree about the appropriateness of the performance. If the contract, for instance, is for the shipment of 100,000 pairs of shoes, and by the time you get delivery, you get some of them the wrong type, that becomes a dispute about performance rather than the existence of the contract itself. And if there is an arbitration agreement, then you would submit that dispute to the arbitration agreement. So these are the only 3 types of agreements that would be subject to the APA. That's really what the second statement says. And again, the confusion is all about not separating the two, does not recognize those, and in fact it thinks that it is insanity to try to do that. And the court says that if the arbitral tribunal decides that there was never a charter party, then unless they're insane, they would have to conclude that they have no jurisdiction at all, because the two are considered the same. They don't make it easier. Let's see if the other cases actually help us understand this concept a little bit better. the Tauler case, Swiss Federal Tribunal, as a court, 1933. It predates the Caltendus case, but it arrives at exactly the opposite conclusion. In making the separability argument, in making a distinction between the underlying contract and the arbitration contract, what do they tell us? How do they make that distinction between the two, the types of contracts? How are they separate? How are they different? And why are they considered separate?
Because the arbitration agreement is considered a procedural one, and the main contract is considered a substantive one, so they are separate.
Yes, that's precisely the distinction they try to make. Substance versus procedure. That is the analytical position that they take. They say, you make an agreement for whatever it is, the exchange of goods and services, or whatever it is. That is an agreement for that agreement is substantive in nature. But the second agreement as to how to resolve disputes that may arise out of that particular agreement is procedural in nature. And any defects that could affect the underlying contract do not necessarily affect the procedural agreement, because these are perceived as two separate types of contracts. And if you look at the middle of the last paragraph on 194, it says, accordingly, the nullity of the main contract assessed accordingly may not readily result in the nullity of the agreement without further consideration, but rather only under the condition that the grounds of nullity simultaneously affect the main contract and the agreement to arbitrate. And as, for example, the contract, there is incapacity or forced to sign. So they leave open the possibility that certain challenges to the underlying contract could actually also be grounds for invalidity of the arbitration agreement. Right? But not all grounds of invalidity would also invalidate the arbitration agreement. An example of this is if one of the parties was under some incapacity to sign the whole contract. That would invalidate the main contract as well as the arbitration. But the grounds of invalidity of the main contract and the arbitration contract are not necessarily the same. But some grounds of invalidity would affect both at the same time simultaneously. We will see the same concept come again in Fiona Trust and other cases. But the Swiss tribunal had no difficulty ruling that these are separate agreements, subject to different laws, but they also recognized the fact that the same grounds of invalidity may at times simultaneously affect both. In which case, they basically become one and the same. One example, they said, is incapacity. If the person did not have the capacity to sign a contract at all, then both contracts could be vitiated or maybe affected. Now, incapacity does not always affect the validity of both contracts at the same time. Can you conceive of a situation whereby incapacity can affect the main contract but not the arbitration contract?
Excess of power of authority, like the agent.
Yeah, excessive. Oh, that's actually a very good example. If you have authorized him to sign the arbitration agreement in relation to, let's say, X, Y, Z, and not A, right? He has the authorization to do this, but not this one. But he could still sign an arbitration agreement for all. This could be the subject matter, or even the vice versa. So it's conceivable that even incapacity could have different results. Another example would be, I don't know how old you have to be to buy a car. If the age of buying a car is 21, for instance, and the age of general contracting is 18, and you are 20, you sign an arbitration contract, but you didn't have the capacity to sign the underlying contract for the purchase of cars, this could still be valid